The stillness of dawn was broken only by the rhythmic creak of the gallows being tested. Marshal James Harker stood in the shadows of the jailhouse porch, watching the town's carpenter finish his grim work. The desert air held that peculiar chill that would vanish with the first rays of sunlight. Harker drew deeply on his cigarette, the ember briefly illuminating a face weathered by 25 years of frontier justice. 3 days, he muttered to himself, flicking ash into the dirt. 3 days and Silas Drake finally gets what's coming. The name alone was enough to darken the marshal's expression. Drake had left a trail of bodies across 3 territories, robbed 2 banks in Colorado, and derailed a train in Wyoming. The testimonies against him filled a leather-bound ledger that Harker kept locked in his desk drawer. Now the notorious outlaw sat in the cell behind him, seemingly unmoved by his impending appointment with the hangman. Hey folks, if you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to know what city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the tale of redemption in the Old West. The town of Redemption Springs had been in a state of tense anticipation since Drake's capture 2 weeks prior. Few believed the marshal would bring him in alive. Fewer still thought Drake would make it to trial without his gang attempting a rescue. Yet here they were. Drake's trial had been swift, his sentence delivered unanimously by a jury of hardened frontiersmen who barely needed to deliberate. But something about the proceedings left Harker uneasy. It wasn't Drake's silence throughout the trial, nor his lack of visible remorse. It was the woman who appeared on the 3rd day, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, her face partially obscured by a modest bonnet. She never spoke, never approached, but her eyes never left Drake's face. And Drake, for the first time since his capture, seemed to recognize something beyond his own predicament. When the sentence was announced, it was to her that he looked, not with fear or anger, but with what Harker could only describe as regret. The carpenter's hammering ceased, breaking Harker's reverie. "She'll hold, Marshal," the man said, giving the trapdoor a final test with his foot. "Strong enough to send Drake straight to the devil himself." Harker nodded, discarding the remains of his cigarette. "Appreciate the craftsmanship, Tom. Not everyone takes such pride in their work these days." The carpenter gathered his tools, casting a wary glance toward the jailhouse. "Is it true what they say, that he killed 30 men?" Harker's jaw tightened. 27 confirmed, likely more we don't know about." The carpenter shook his head. "Hard to believe such evil walks among us. What makes a man turn out like that?" It was a question Harker had pondered many nights, watching Drake through the bars, trying to discern what separated men like him from the monster before him. Some men are just born wrong, Tom, born with something missing inside them. Inside the jailhouse, Deputy Caleb Wilson had just finished bringing breakfast to the prisoner. At 45, Wilson had served as Harker's right hand for nearly a decade. He'd seen his share of outlaws and killers, but none had unsettled him quite like Drake. It wasn't just the man's reputation, it was the eerie calmness with which he accepted his fate. Drake sat on the edge of his cot, barely touching the plate of beans and hardtack before him. His dark hair hung limply around a face that might have been handsome once, before the scar that ran from temple to jawline altered its symmetry. His hands, now unbound within the confines of his cell, bore the calluses and scars of a violent life. "You ought to eat," Wilson said, more out of routine than concern. "Don't much matter now, does it?" Drake replied, his voice surprisingly soft for a man of his reputation. The door opened, bringing with it a slash of sunlight and Marshal Harker's imposing silhouette. Drake didn't look up, continuing to push the beans around his plate with methodical disinterest. "You've got a visitor," Harker announced, the surprise evident in his deputy's expression. No one had come to see Drake since his capture. No family, no friends, certainly none of his gang members. "I told her it was against protocol, but she's persistent. Says she's family." Drake's head lifted slightly, something flashing in his eyes that Harker couldn't quite identify. 5 minutes, the marshal continued, and Wilson stays in the room. Drake set the plate aside, rising to his full height. For a moment, Harker was reminded why so many men feared Silas Drake. Even unarmed and behind bars, there was something undeniably dangerous about him, like a caged predator merely biding its time. "Who is she?" Drake asked, his voice carefully neutral. Harker studied him. "Says her name is Charlotte Blake. Claims she's your sister." Something shifted in Drake's expression, so subtle Harker nearly missed it. Recognition, certainly, but tempered with what appeared to be concern. "I don't have a sister," Drake said evenly, but Harker had interviewed enough criminals to recognize a lie when he heard one. "Well, she seems mighty convinced otherwise. Your call, Drake. See her or don't. Makes no difference to me." Drake turned away, moving to the small barred window that overlooked the gallows in the town square. After a long moment, he spoke without turning. "Send her in." Harker nodded to Wilson, who left to fetch the visitor. When they were alone, Harker observed the rigid set of Drake's shoulders. "Didn't figure you for a man with family ties," he remarked. Drake's response was barely audible. "There's plenty you don't know about me, Marshal." Charlotte Blake entered the jailhouse like a whisper. Her simple blue dress and dark hair pulled back in a modest bun, giving her the appearance of respectability that seemed at odds with any connection to Silas Drake. She carried herself with quiet dignity, though Harker noted the slight tremor in her hands as Wilson led her to the cell. 5 minutes, ma'am," Harker reminded her, taking position near the door while Wilson stationed himself beside the desk. Drake turned from the window, and Harker witnessed something he never expected to see: vulnerability flashing across the outlaw's features, before being quickly masked. "Hello, Silas," Charlotte said softly. Drake approached the bars slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. "Charlotte," he replied, her name carrying a weight that suggested a history far more complex than a simple sibling relationship. "You shouldn't have come here." "Did you think I wouldn't?" she asked, her voice stronger now, despite its softness. "When I heard..." She glanced toward the window, toward the gallows visible beyond. "I had to see you." Drake's hands gripped the bars, knuckles whitening. "There's nothing for you here," he said, though the gentleness with which he spoke contradicted his words. "Just memories best forgotten, and a reputation that'll only cause you harm." Charlotte moved closer, close enough that Harker tensed instinctively, his hand moving to his sidearm. But Drake made no threatening motion. If anything, he seemed to retreat slightly, as if afraid his proximity might somehow taint her. 3 years, Silas," she said. 3 years I've been looking for you." Drake shook his head. "You shouldn't have been. The man you're looking for died a long time ago, Charlotte." The intensity between them made Harker uncomfortable, as if he were intruding on something deeply private. Charlotte reached through the bars, her fingers stopping just short of Drake's face, hovering near the scar that marked him. "I don't believe that," she whispered. Drake remained perfectly still, neither leaning into her touch nor pulling away. "You should," he replied. "I've done things. There's blood on these hands that'll never wash clean." Charlotte finally completed the gesture, her fingertips gently tracing the scar. I know what they say about you. I've heard the stories. Drake closed his eyes briefly at her touch, a muscle working in his jaw. Then you know why you need to leave and never look back. There's nothing I can do to make it right. Not anymore. Time's up, Harker announced, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the scene before him. Charlotte withdrew her hand reluctantly. I'll come back tomorrow, she told Drake, who shook his head. Don't, he replied. Please, let me spare you this at least. But the determination in Charlotte's eyes suggested his plea would go unheeded. As Wilson escorted her out, Shu paused at the door, looking back at Drake with an expression Harker couldn't quite decipher. You're wrong, Silas, she said quietly. There's still time. After she left, Drake returned to his cot, sitting with his head bowed and hands clasped before him. Harker studied him, seeing for the first time something other than the cold-blooded killer he'd been tracking for years. She's not your sister, Harker stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Drake looked up, his expression unreadable once more. No, he confirmed, she's not. Night fell over Redemption Springs, bringing with it a restlessness that kept Marshall Harker at his desk long after he would normally have retired to his small room above the general store. Wilson had gone home to his wife hours ago, leaving Harker alone with their prisoner and his thoughts. Drake lay on his cot, arms folded behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't spoken since Charlotte's departure, hadn't touched the dinner brought to him, hadn't made any attempt to engage with his captors. Harker lit a lantern, opened the leather ledger, and began reviewing the case notes one final time. The list of Drake's crimes was extensive. The evidence overwhelming. Witnesses had placed him at every scene, had identified him without hesitation. Yet something nagged at Harker's instincts, something about Drake's demeanor that didn't align with the savage brutality of the crimes attributed to him. You're wondering if they got the right man, Drake said suddenly, startling Harker from his contemplation. The outlaw hadn't moved, still staring upward as if the answers to some great mystery were written on the jailhouse ceiling. I know what the evidence says, Drake, Harker replied, closing the ledger. 27 dead men don't lie. Drake turned his head, fixing Harker with a steady gaze. No, they don't, he agreed, but the living sometimes do. There was no plea in his voice, no desperate claim of innocence, just a quiet statement that unsettled Harker more than any protestation might have. You confessed, Harker reminded him, in front of the judge and jury. Said you did it all. Drake's mouth curved into something not quite a smile. So I did. A knock at the door interrupted them. Harker frowned, checking his pocket watch. Nearly midnight, well past the hour for social calls. Hand on his revolver, he approached the door cautiously. Who's there? He called. Charlotte Blake, came the reply, her voice unmistakable even through the wooden door. Harker hesitated, glancing back at Drake, who had risen to a sitting position, tension evident in his posture. Against his better judgment, Harker unbolted the door, opening it to find Charlotte standing in the moonlight, a shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders against the night chill. Mrs. Blake, Harker acknowledged, blocking the entrance. Visiting hours are long past. Her eyes, luminous in the darkness, held a desperate urgency. Please, Marshall, what I have to say can't wait until morning. Something in her manner gave Harker pause. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter, but kept himself positioned between her and the cell. Drake stood now, gripping the bars, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. I thought I told you not to come back, he said, though there was no anger in his voice. Charlotte ignored him, addressing Harker directly. "Marshal, there are things you need to know about the case against Silas." Parker crossed his arms. "Ma'am, the trial is over. The verdict's been delivered. There's nothing more to discuss." Charlotte shook her head, her composure cracking slightly. "The witnesses lied. The evidence was planted. Silas Drake is guilty of many things, Marshal, but not all the crimes he's been condemned for." Parker had heard similar pleas before, from wives, mothers, lovers of the men he'd brought to justice. Always the same desperate claims of innocence, the same certainty that some terrible mistake had been made. "Mrs. Blake," he began, his tone professionally sympathetic but firm. "I understand you care for him, but—" "You don't understand anything," she interrupted, her voice low but intense. "I'm not here because of feelings, Marshal. I'm here because of facts." From within her shawl, she produced a folded document, extending it toward him. "This is a sworn affidavit from Thomas Reeves, the bank teller who testified that Silas shot the manager during the Colorado robbery. He's recanting his testimony, admitting he was coerced into identifying Silas." Drake watched the exchange silently, his expression betraying nothing, as Harker reluctantly took the document, unfolding it to examine the contents. The paper appeared official, complete with notary seal and signature. This could be forged, Harker pointed out, though doubt had begun to creep into his mind. Charlotte's chin lifted slightly. "Check the signature against the court records. Send a telegram to Judge Hollister in Denver. He took Reeves' revised statement yesterday." Harker refolded the document, tucking it into his vest pocket. "Even if this is genuine, Mrs. Blake, it only calls into question one of many crimes. The evidence against Drake is substantial." Charlotte stepped closer, lowering her voice. "How much of that evidence came from Sheriff Blackwood and his deputies?" The name sent a chill through Harker. Nathan Blackwood, sheriff of Cripple Creek, had been instrumental in building the case against Drake, providing witnesses and evidence that linked the outlaw to multiple crimes across the territory. "What are you suggesting?" Harker asked carefully. Charlotte glanced at Drake, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I'm suggesting, Marshal," she replied, "that Sheriff Blackwood has been using Silas as a scapegoat to cover his own criminal enterprise. That he's been eliminating rivals and witnesses, then attributing those deaths to the notorious Silas Drake." Harker's skepticism must have shown on his face, for Charlotte continued with increasing urgency. "Why do you think Silas never challenged the charges, never offered a defense? He's been protecting me." Drake's hands tightened on the bars. "Charlotte, don't," he warned, but she pressed on. "Blackwood knew I was investigating him. He threatened to kill me unless Silas took the blame for his crimes. Said he'd make it look like just another Drake murder." Her voice broke slightly. "Silas turned himself in, confessed to everything they accused him of, to keep me safe." Harker looked between them, trying to separate truth from desperate fiction. "That's quite a tale, Mrs. Blake, but without evidence—" "There is evidence," Cheat interrupted, "hidden at the old Carson mining claim 10 miles west of town. Documentation of Blackwood's operation, names, dates, transactions, enough to exonerate Silas of at least half the murders he's been charged with." Harker turned to Drake, studying the outlaw's face for any sign of deception. "Is this true?" he asked directly. Drake held his gaze steadily. "Some of it," he admitted. "I've done plenty worth hanging for, Marshal. Won't pretend otherwise. But Blackwood's crew has been busy, and my reputation makes for convenient blame." There was a bitter resignation in his tone that carried the ring of truth. "And her?" Harker nodded toward Charlotte. "What's her part in all this?" Something softened in Drake's expression. She was investigating land fraud for the Denver Tribune when she stumbled onto Blackwood's operation. She didn't know who I was when we first met. By the time she figured it out, he trailed off, looking at Charlotte with an expression Harker had never expected to see on the face of a killer like Drake. Something akin to tenderness. "He saved my life," Charlotte finished quietly. "Blackwood's men had me cornered. Would have killed me if Silas hadn't intervened." Her eyes never left Drake's face as she spoke. That's when I saw it, that there was more to him than the stories. That underneath everything he'd done, everything he'd become, there was still a man capable of choice, of change. Drake looked away, as if unable to bear the weight of her regard. "Don't mistake desperation for redemption, Charlotte," he said softly. "One good deed doesn't wash away a lifetime of sin." She moved closer to the cell, her fingers curling around the bars inches from his. "It wasn't just one deed, Silas. It was a beginning." Harker watched them, the dynamics between them shifting his perception of the case in ways that left him deeply unsettled. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "why bring this to me now? Why not during the trial?" Charlotte turned back to him. "Because Blackwood has men everywhere. We couldn't be sure who to trust. But when I heard the execution was scheduled," her voice faltered, "I had to take the risk." "And your reputation for fairness preceded you, Marshal Harker." Harker paced the small office, weighing his options. The law was clear. The sentence passed. Yet if there was even a chance that justice had been perverted, that an innocent man might hang while the guilty went free. "I'll need more than an affidavit and your word," he said finally. "If there's evidence at this mining claim, I'll need to see it." "I can take you there," Charlotte offered immediately. "Tomorrow, at first light." Drake's reaction was instant and vehement. "No," he said sharply. "Blackwood's men could be watching. It's too dangerous." The concern in his voice only reinforced Harker's growing suspicion that their relationship was far more complex than either had admitted. "She won't be going alone," Harker assured him, making his decision. "Wilson and I will accompany her." He fixed Charlotte with a stern look. "But I want to be clear, Mrs. Blake. If this is some kind of deception, some ploy to help him escape—" "It's not," she interrupted with quiet conviction. "I'm not asking you to set him free, Marshal. Only to ensure that justice is truly served, that Silas answers for his actual crimes, not those of others." The dawn that broke over Redemption Springs the following morning brought with it a sky the color of hammered copper. Harker had spent a restless night contemplating Charlotte Blake's revelations, torn between his duty to uphold the law as written and his deeper commitment to justice itself. He'd sent Wilson to inform the town council that the execution would be delayed by one day, a decision met with considerable resistance, but ultimately accepted on the marshal's authority. Now, as Charlotte led them along a winding trail through scrubland toward the foothills, Harker found himself studying her with professional assessment. She rode confidently, familiar with the terrain, occasionally pointing out landmarks to ensure they remained on course. If she was leading them into a trap, she showed no sign of nervousness or deceit. "How'd you come to know Drake?" Wilson asked, breaking the tense silence that had accompanied them since leaving town. Charlotte glanced back, seeming to consider how much to reveal. "I was following a story about land swindles," she explained after a moment. "Homesteaders being forced off their claims through intimidation, forged documents, sometimes outright violence. The evidence pointed to someone in law enforcement being involved." She guided her horse around a boulder-strewn section of trail. "I was gathering testimonies from affected families when Blackwood's men caught up to me. They'd been watching, knew I was getting too close. They took me to an abandoned cabin, made it clear I wouldn't be leaving alive. Her voice remained steady, though Harker detected the undercurrent of remembered fear. And Drake just happened to be in the vicinity? Harker questioned skeptically. Charlotte shook her head. Not by chance, no. He'd been tracking the same operation from another angle. The gang had been using his name, his reputation, to terrorize the region. He wanted it stopped. Wilson exchanged a glance with Harker. Hard to believe a man like Drake would care about his name being misused, the deputy remarked. He had his reasons, Charlotte replied simply, offering no further explanation. They rode in silence until the trail opened into a small valley where the remnants of mining operations were visible. Collapsed shafts, rusted equipment, the skeletal frame of what had once been an assay office. There, Charlotte indicated, pointing toward a ramshackle cabin nestled against the hillside. The evidence is hidden beneath the floorboards, under the stove. As they dismounted and secured their horses, Parker signaled Wilson to remain alert. You stay out here. Keep watch, he instructed his deputy. Mrs. Blake and I will retrieve the documents. The cabin's interior was thick with dust and cobwebs, evidence that it had been abandoned for some time. Charlotte moved directly to the cast-iron stove in the corner, kneeling beside it. Help me move this, she requested. Together, they shifted the heavy stove, revealing several loose floorboards beneath. Charlotte pried them up, reaching into the darkness below. What she extracted was a leather satchel, its surface cracked and weathered. Everything's here, she confirmed, opening it to reveal dozens of documents. Ledgers, correspondence, maps with property boundaries marked in red. Blackwood's operation wasn't just about land fraud. He's been running protection rackets, orchestrating robberies, eliminating competitors and witnesses. She spread several papers on the dusty table. These are records of payoffs, schedules of shipments targeted for robbery. And this, she handed Harker a folded document, is a list of people murdered by Blackwood's gang, with dates and locations that match exactly to killings attributed to Silas. Harker examined the evidence with growing unease. The documentation was extensive, detailed, and damning, not just to Blackwood, but to several prominent figures in the territory. Names of judges, bankers, and business owners appeared alongside records of bribes and coercion. If authentic, it represented corruption on a scale Harker had rarely encountered. Why would they keep such incriminating evidence? He wondered aloud. Charlotte's expression was grim. Insurance. Blackwood doesn't trust his partners any more than they trust him. Each maintained records that could destroy the others if they were betrayed. She hesitated, then added, Silas discovered their cache during a confrontation with Blackwood's lieutenant. He kept it hidden, knowing it was his only leverage if things went wrong. And you? Harker asked, studying her intently. What's your stake in all this? Drake's not family. By your own admission, you barely knew him before this started. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. At first, it was the story. Corruption, conspiracy, the public's right to know. Then, she glanced down at the documents spread before them. Then I saw what he did when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. He could have left me to die that day. Should have, by all accounts of who Silas Drake is supposed to be. Instead, he risked everything to save a stranger. There was a quiet certainty in her voice that Harker couldn't dismiss. After that, I had to know the truth. About him, about Blackwood, about all of it. Before Harker could respond, Wilson burst through the door, his expression urgent. Riders coming, he reported tersely. 6, maybe 7. Armed. Harker moved swiftly to the window, peering through a gap in the weathered boards. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of horsemen moving at speed. "Blackwood?" he asked, turning back to Charlotte. Her face had drained of color. "Most likely. We were followed, or someone in town sent word." Harker's mind raced through their options. They were outnumbered, with limited ammunition, and no defensive position worth holding. "How far to the next settlement?" he asked Wilson. 20 miles to Copper Creek," the deputy replied. "Rough country between here and there." "We need to move," Harker decided, gathering the documents and returning them to the satchel. "Take different trails, split their forces." He handed the satchel to Charlotte. "Mrs. Blake, you and Wilson head east, then cut north toward Copper Creek. Telegraph Judge Morrison in Denver. Tell him everything. Give him these documents." Charlotte shook her head. "They'll be expecting that. They'll have men watching the trails east." Harker's expression hardened. "Then what do you suggest?" Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "Silas would know. He survived Blackwood's men for years. He knows their tactics, their weaknesses." The implication hung in the air between them. "You're suggesting we break out a convicted murderer?" Harker stated flatly. "I'm suggesting," Charlotte countered, "that we need someone who can outthink Blackwood if we're going to survive long enough to expose him. Someone who's been doing it successfully longer than anyone else." Wilson looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Marshal, you can't be considering this. Drake's scheduled to hang." The law is meant to serve justice," Harker interrupted, his decision crystallizing. "If half of what's in these documents is true, then justice demands we act." The approaching riders were close enough now that the thunder of hooves carried clearly to them. "We head back to town," Harker ordered. "Stay off the main trails, use the riverbeds where we can, and pray we make it before Blackwood's men cut us off." The return journey to Redemption Springs was a desperate race against both Blackwood's pursuing men and the setting sun. Twice they were forced to divert from their planned route when scouts were spotted ahead. Once, they abandoned the horses to slip through a narrow canyon on foot, retrieving the animals on the other side. By the time the town's lights appeared in the gathering darkness, all three were exhausted, their mounts lathered and near collapse. They approached the jailhouse from the rear alley, dismounting in the shadows. "Wilson, check the street," Harker directed. "Make sure we weren't followed into town." As the deputy moved cautiously toward the street, Harker turned to Charlotte. "I need your word that if I do this, if I release Drake, you'll both cooperate with the legal process that follows. No running, no vigilante justice against Blackwood." Charlotte didn't hesitate. "You have my word," she assured him. "All we want is the truth to come to light." Harker studied her, searching for any sign of deception, but found only determined sincerity. Wilson returned, his expression grim. "Street's clear, but there's something wrong," he reported. "Town's too quiet. No one at the saloon, no lamps at the hotel." Harker's instincts immediately sharpened. "Blackwood," he muttered. "He's already here." Moving silently, they entered the jailhouse through the back door, weapons drawn. The office was empty, the lamp unlit. Harker struck a match, holding it high to illuminate the interior. The cell door stood open, its lock broken. Drake was gone. "Silas," Charlotte whispered, fear evident in her voice. Harker moved quickly to the desk. Finding the drawer forced open, his ledger missing. "They've taken everything," he realized. "The evidence, the testimony records. They're erasing the case." A groan from the corner drew their attention. In the shadows beneath the gun rack lay a figure, bloodied but conscious. Judge Harmon, who had presided over Drake's trial. Charlotte rushed to his side, while Harker kept his weapon trained on the doorway. "Judge, what happened?" Charlotte asked urgently, examining his injuries. The elderly man grimaced in pain as he struggled to focus on her. "Blackwood," he managed, came with his deputies. "Said they had orders to transfer the prisoner. When I questioned their authority, they—" "Where did they take Drake?" Harker demanded, kneeling beside them. The judge shook his head weakly. "Don't know for certain. Overheard something about making an example. The old hanging tree outside town." He clutched Charlotte's hand desperately. "They mean to lynch him, bypass the law entirely, make it look like vigilante justice." Charlotte's face paled. "They'll kill him to silence him, then hunt us down next." Harker stood, his decision made. "Wilson, get the judge to doctor. Winters, tell no one else what's happened." He checked his revolver, ensuring all 6 chambers were loaded. "Mrs. Blake, you're staying here where it's safe." Charlotte rose to face him, her expression resolute. "No, I'm coming with you. Silas will need someone he trusts." The old hanging tree stood on a lonely rise, a mile outside Redemption Springs, its massive branches silhouetted against the night sky. As Harker and Charlotte approached on foot, staying low and using the terrain for cover, they could make out the glow of lanterns and the shadowy figures of men gathered beneath the ancient oak. In the center of the group, barely visible in the uncertain light, stood Silas Drake, hands bound behind him, a noose already around his neck. Blackwood himself was easily identifiable, a tall figure in a long coat, his sheriff's badge catching occasional glints of lantern light as he addressed his men. "Get closer," Harker whispered to Charlotte. "I need to hear what they're saying." Creeping forward through the dry brush, they managed to position themselves within earshot, concealed by a cluster of boulders. "Loose ends," Blackwood was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Once Drake is dealt with, we find Harker and the woman. No witnesses, no evidence, no problem." One of his deputies shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff, lynching a prisoner's a federal offense. Marshal Harker won't let this slide." Blackwood's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Marshal Harker will be dead by morning. As for the law, we're the law out here, boys. Always have been." He turned to Drake, who stood impassive despite his predicament. "Any last words, Drake? Perhaps you'd like to tell my men how you murdered all those people? Confess your sins before meeting your maker?" Drake's response was quiet but clear. "We both know whose sins these are, Blackwood. The only difference is, I've made peace with mine." There was a dignity in his bearing that surprised Harker, a calm acceptance that seemed at odds with the reputation of a cold-blooded killer. Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to a level barely audible to the hidden observers. "I'll find her, Drake, the newspaper woman, and when I do, she'll suffer for every bit of trouble she's caused me." For the first time, emotion flickered across Drake's face, a flash of anger quickly contained. "She's smarter than you think," he replied evenly, "and you're not as untouchable as you believe." Blackwood's response was to nod to one of his men, who positioned himself beside Drake's horse, ready to slap its flank and leave the outlaw hanging. "Now," Harker whispered, rising from cover with his revolver drawn. "Sheriff Blackwood," he called, his voice carrying the full authority of his office. "Step away from the prisoner." Blackwood whirled, his hand dropping to his sidearm. His men scattered, seeking cover, weapons appearing in their hands. "Marshal Harker," Blackwood acknowledged, his initial surprise quickly masked by calculated calm. "This is unfortunate timing. We were just carrying out the court's sentence, a bit ahead of schedule." Harker advanced steadily, keeping his aim centered on Blackwood's chest. "That's not how the law works. Sheriff, as you well know, Drake is my prisoner, under my jurisdiction. He gestured with his free hand. Cut him down, now. Blackwood made no move to comply. I'm afraid I can't do that, Marshal. Public safety concerns. Had information his gang was planning a rescue attempt. His eyes narrowed. Speaking of which, I see you brought company. The Blake woman, I presume. Charlotte had risen from her hiding place, staying close to Harker. We found your documentation, Sheriff, she announced, her voice carrying across the clearing. The evidence of your operation, the murders, the corruption, it's already on its way to the federal authorities. It was a bluff. The satchel was still hidden in the saddlebags of Harker's horse, tethered 100 yards away. But Blackwood's reaction was immediate and revealing. His composed facade cracked, replaced by naked fury. You're lying, he snarled. There is no documentation. Carson mining claim, Drake said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. Hidden under the stove, just where I said it would be, wasn't it, Charlotte? The exchange confirmed everything for Harker. Drake had indeed been working with Charlotte, had preserved evidence against Blackwood at great personal risk. Blackwood's expression contorted with rage. Kill them, he ordered his men. Kill them all! Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, forcing Harker and Charlotte to dive for cover behind the boulders. Harker returned fire, downing one of Blackwood's deputies with a clean shot. Charlotte pressed herself against the rock face, unarmed and exposed. We need to get to Drake, she shouted over the gunfire, before they decide to shoot him or hang him outright. Harker assessed their situation grimly. They were pinned down, outnumbered, with limited ammunition. Cover the left side, he instructed Charlotte, handing her his backup revolver. I'm going to work around to the right, try to reach Drake. He waited for a lull in the shooting, then darted between boulders, making his way closer to the hanging tree. Blackwood's men adjusted their fire, forcing him back into cover. From his new position, Harker could see Drake more clearly. The outlaw hadn't remained passive during the firefight. Despite his bound hands, he had managed to work the noose loose enough to slip it over his head. Now he was maneuvering toward the horses, using the animals for cover as he attempted to free his hands. Blackwood had also noticed Drake's efforts. The prisoner, he shouted to his men. Don't let him escape. Two deputies broke cover, rushing toward Drake with guns drawn. Harker fired, forcing them back, but not before one got off a shot that grazed Drake's arm. The outlaw stumbled, but kept moving, finally reaching a saddlebag where a knife might be found. Charlotte, seeing Drake's predicament, emerged from cover long enough to provide suppressing fire, allowing him the seconds needed to locate a blade and cut his bonds. Free at last, Drake immediately appropriated a revolver from the nearest saddlebag, joining the firefight with remarkable accuracy despite his injury. The tide began to turn. Drake's unexpected addition to the battle caught Blackwood's men in a crossfire. Two more deputies fell to well-placed shots. Surrender, Blackwood, Harker called out. You're outnumbered now. Blackwood's response was a wild volley of gunfire in Harker's direction. I'll see you all dead first, he raged. Then, realizing his position was untenable, he made a desperate break for his horse. Drake emerged from behind the tree trunk, revolver leveled. Blackwood, he shouted. The sheriff turned, firing as he moved. The shots went wide. Drake's did not. Blackwood staggered, clutching his chest, then collapsed face first into the dirt. A sudden silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the nervous shuffling of the horses and the groans of the wounded. The remaining deputies, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons in surrender. Drake approached Blackwood's prone form cautiously, kicking away the sheriff's revolver before kneeling to check for signs of life. He looked up at Harker, who had emerged from cover with his weapon still trained on the surrendering men. "Dead," Drake confirmed simply. Harker nodded, experiencing a complex mixture of relief and regret. Justice would be served, but not through the proper channels of law, an outcome he had hoped to avoid. Charlotte ran to Drake's side, examining his wounded arm with concern. "It's just a graze," he assured her, though the bloodstain spreading across his sleeve suggested otherwise. She tore a strip from her petticoat, binding the wound tightly. "You could have escaped," she observed quietly. "When the shooting started, you could have taken a horse and been miles away by now." Drake's gaze held hers for a long moment. "And leave you and the marshal to face Blackwood alone?" He shook his head. "There was a time I might have, Charlotte, but not anymore." There was something in the way they looked at each other that made Harker turn away, focusing instead on securing the surviving deputies. The return to Redemption Springs was a solemn procession. The bodies of Blackwood and his fallen men were draped across their horses, the surviving deputies walking alongside under guard. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through town. By the time they reached the jailhouse, a crowd had gathered in the street, murmurs of confusion and speculation rippling through the onlookers. Judge Harmon, his injuries treated by the town doctor, awaited them on the jailhouse porch. His expression was grave as he surveyed the aftermath of the night's violence. "Marshal Harker," he acknowledged, "I see justice has been served, albeit not as we might have wished." His gaze shifted to Drake, who stood beside Charlotte, his wrists once again bound, though more for appearance than necessity. "And what of the prisoner?" 3 days later, the town of Redemption Springs witnessed an unprecedented scene in the courthouse. The gallery was packed to capacity, every seat filled, onlookers standing along the walls and spilling out into the corridor beyond. Judge Morrison, having arrived from Denver the previous day, presided over proceedings that had drawn attention from as far away as Santa Fe. On the witness stand sat Silas Drake, his testimony regarding Sheriff Blackwood's criminal enterprise having continued for the better part of 2 days. The documentation recovered from the Carson mining claim had proven authentic and extensive, implicating not only Blackwood and his immediate circle, but also revealing corruption reaching into the highest levels of territorial government. "Mr. Drake," Judge Morrison addressed him, "your testimony has been instrumental in exposing this conspiracy. Combined with Mrs. Blake's investigative work and Marshal Harker's corroboration, it presents a compelling case for the reassessment of numerous convictions, including your own." The judge consulted the papers before him. "The court acknowledges that while you have admitted guilt to certain crimes, evidence suggests you have been wrongfully accused of others. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, and in recognition of your cooperation, this court is prepared to recommend commutation of your death sentence to a term of imprisonment, with possibility of parole after 15 years. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Drake, seated at the defense table alongside Charlotte and the court-appointed attorney, remained impassive. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "given your actions in assisting Marshal Harker against Blackwood's men, potentially saving the lives of both the Marshal and Mrs. Blake, the court will note this act of redemption in its formal recommendation to the governor." He fixed Drake with a stern look. "Make no mistake, Mr. Drake, you have much to answer for and a long road of atonement ahead. But the court believes that road need not end at the gallows." Drake nodded once, acceptance rather than gratitude in the gesture. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said simply. As the proceedings concluded and the court adjourned, the crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with discussion of the day's revelations. Drake was permitted a few moments with Charlotte before being returned to his cell to await transfer to the territorial prison. They stood in a corner of the courtroom, under Harker's watchful eye, their conversation private, but their body language speaking volumes. Charlotte's hand rested on Drake's arm, her head tilted up to meet his gaze. 15 years, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Drake's expression softened in a way Harker had never seen before, vulnerability replacing the hardened facade he typically presented to the world. A lifetime for some, he acknowledged, but not for us. Charlotte reached up, her fingers tracing the scar on his face with gentle familiarity. "I'll wait," she promised. "I'll continue my work, make sure all of Blackwood's operation is exposed. And I'll visit as often as they allow." Drake caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek for a moment before lowering it. "You shouldn't," he said, though without conviction. "You deserve better than a man with my history." Charlotte's smile was both sad and determined. "What I deserve is the chance to choose for myself, and I choose to believe in the man you're becoming, not just the man you were." She stood on tiptoe, pressing a kiss to his cheek, near the corner of his mouth. 15 years. Remember that when the days grow long. Harker approached, indicating it was time. As he led Drake back toward the cells, the marshal found himself reflecting on the events of the past week. "You know," he said conversationally, "in all my years upholding the law, I've never seen a case quite like yours, Drake." The prisoner walked beside him, shoulders straight despite the chains. "How so?" he asked. Harker considered his words carefully. Most men faced with the hangman's noose will say anything, do anything to save their skin. You confessed to crimes you didn't commit to protect someone else, then risked your life to save her and bring the true criminals to justice. He shook his head slightly. "Makes me wonder what kind of man you might have been if life had dealt you different cards." Drake was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative, without its usual edge. "I've done things I can't take back, Marshal. Made choices I'll answer for, one way or another. But meeting her..." He glanced back toward the courtroom where Charlotte still stood, watching them. "It made me see there might be other choices, even for someone like me. That maybe it's never too late to find something worth living for, something better than just surviving." Harker nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. 15 years is a long time, he observed, unlocking the cell door. Drake stepped inside, turning to face him as the door closed between them. "Not so long," he replied quietly, "for a man who's learning what it means to hope." In the years that followed, Redemption Springs would remember the case of Silas Drake as a turning point in the territory's history. The exposure of Blackwood's criminal network led to numerous resignations, arrests, and reforms throughout the region. Charlotte Blake's investigative series for the Denver Tribune earned her national recognition and a reputation as one of the most fearless journalists of the frontier. And Marshal James Harker, having witnessed firsthand how easily justice could be perverted by those entrusted to uphold it, became known for a particular thoroughness in his investigations, an unwillingness to accept easy answers when difficult questions remained. As for Silas Drake, the notorious outlaw whose name had once inspired terror throughout the West, his story took a turn few could have predicted. His cooperation led to the conviction of dozens of corrupt officials and the exoneration of several men wrongfully imprisoned. In prison, he became a model inmate, using his time to educate himself, even assisting the warden in identifying and preventing potential escapes by other prisoners. And every month, Without fail, Charlotte Blake would make the journey to visit him, bringing books, news of the outside world, and the unwavering belief in the man she had glimpsed beneath the legend. The man who had saved her life, and in doing so, found a reason to save his own. 15 years later, when Silas Drake finally walked through the prison gates as a free man, Charlotte was waiting. The journalist had grown into a formidable editor by then, her newspaper known for championing justice and exposing corruption wherever it appeared. The former outlaw, his dark hair now streaked with gray, his face bearing new lines, but his eyes, clearer than they had ever been, stopped before her, momentarily unsure despite their years of correspondence and visits. "I wasn't certain you'd be here," he admitted. Charlotte's smile was radiant as she took his hand in hers. "I made a promise," she reminded him. 15 years, no matter how long the days. And as they departed together, leaving behind the shadows of the past to face whatever future awaited them, those who witnessed their reunion were reminded of what Charlotte had pleaded on that fateful night so many years before. "Don't kill him. He knows my touch. You see a monster. I see a man learning love." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.